Good morning, everybody. I'd like to take a quick look at the Gospel reading for Sunday, which is the second Sunday of Lent. And this past week, at our men's group on Tuesday morning, I asked a question to the men that says, when was the last time you've had, or have you had an experience of the presence of God in your life? And I was surprised that straight away, one after another, different people stood up and said, for example, one man said, like, for him, when his wife and himself adopted a baby, he says the wife handed this little baby into my hands, and he says it was like as if God was right there. God was very present to me at that moment. I'd say about 3 or 4 others talked about while they were on Curcio weekends and how at different stages along the way they felt God's presence, and it hit them in a very real way. And one individual or 2 individuals talked about Kairos weekend. That is, Kairos weekend is a retreat in prison, and again they were just somewhere during the course of those retreats where they were dealing with like 25, 30 men, they also felt God's presence in a very real way. And one other man, of course, talked about how he, at Mass, he was hit by God's presence on more than one occasion. And the reason why I bring those to the fore today is because of the fact that Sunday's Gospel reading, it's about the Transfiguration of Jesus, which you find the story in all 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But it's really a story of God's presence. How Jesus we're told he took Peter, James, and John up the mountain, and they were in prayer. And anytime there's mention of a mountain, of Jesus on the mountain in Scripture, it's always somehow it's a reminder of God's presence going to enter into the picture somewhere along the line. But on this occasion, we're told that all of a sudden we're told that Jesus, before Peter, James, and John, that he is transfigured, and the actual word says, while he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzlingly white. So all of a sudden, this appearance would, I suppose one would say, it was a very intense experience of the presence of God. And we were told that in the process that Peter, James, and John were sort of, they were sort of, it's almost as if they were into a slumber, into a sleep. They're just sort of blown away by this very intense presence of God. And at the same time, we're told that as they sort of opened their eyes, that with Jesus himself in his transfigured state, he had Moses and Elijah were with him, conversing with him. And Moses and Elijah, of course, are representatives of the Old Testament and the Old Testament covenant. And we're told that they're conversing with him, and they're conversing about the exodus of Jesus. The exodus of Jesus, of course, refers to his passion, death, and resurrection. So, in some way, in a very real sense, you could say, right there in that moment, you had the whole of Scripture. You had Moses and Elijah representing the old covenant, and yet Jesus representing the new covenant, which was culminated, of course, with his resurrection from the dead. Anyhow, the moment is a very, very powerful moment, and we're told that Peter, James, and John says, they were so blown away by the experience and said, let's make 3 tents here, one for you, Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. In other words, basically what Peter is saying in that instance is, let's freeze the moment. This is so good, we would want it to last. But unfortunately, we're told that didn't happen. Rather, we're told that they were overcome with the cloud, and the cloud again, like in Old Testament, in the book of Exodus chapter 24, we're told that Moses, when he went up to experience God's presence, there was a huge, he found himself in a cloud. So the cloud is sort of a reminder of God's presence. So anyhow, they were in the cloud, and they heard the heavenly voice voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved son, this is my chosen son, listen to him. And that in a sense takes us back to the baptism of Jesus, the Jordan River, when after he was baptized, the voice of the Father says, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Anyhow, as soon as the cloud sort of disappeared, they found themselves with Jesus alone, and they came down the mountain and continued with their normal lives. One would expect that this experience, this intense experience of God's presence, you'd expect that it would have just changed their lives so completely that from that time onwards they would be totally aware of his presence. Well, for whatever strange reason, it didn't seem to happen like that, because you find that if you go through the rest of the Gospel of St. Luke, you find that after a while, Peter, James, and John, especially Peter denied him, and James and John were arguing about which of them was the most important. So, in other words, it didn't change their lives completely. But so we think of that wonderful moment, that experience of God, and we think about the experience of God in our own lives. I mentioned the experience of the men in the beginning at our men's group yesterday morning, but I'm sure all of us somewhere along the line have experienced God's real presence, and we, like Peter, James, and John, we would like to sort of freeze the moment, but unfortunately, religious experience it's always like a fleeting moment. It's never a lasting thing. So it sort of comes and it goes. And in some ways, I think when we have a religious experience, as you know, as we move on in our life, it's good to be able to look back at those experiences, especially during difficult times, to know that God was with me back then. I don't feel his presence now, but he was with me back then in a very real way. So I know because of that he is also with me on this occasion. So it's a great message. I think it's a good gospel reading, and it brings God makes him very real in the presence of individuals. And hopefully, as we ponder this gospel reading at the weekend, it will help us in reflecting upon our own experience of how the Lord has made himself present to us somewhere along the line. Thank you.